One of the things that I found from Yogananda, learned from him, we're going to express here today. Because this lecture is in two parts. And you might think, well, what's music got to do with lecturing? The first part of this lecture will be music. Music that I wrote. But Yogananda taught me something. I had studied philosophy. I'd done a great deal of thinking. I'd tried to figure out what all life was all about. When I met him, I found that music was what was missing. Music is what is missing from our inner life. Music is what is missing from our philosophy. The music of the soul. He taught me this, and I wrote a lot of it out into, some 400 pieces of music. Today you're going to hear a little bit of it. But I want you to hear it with your heart, because that's how I wrote it and why I wrote it. The heart is the necessary balance to the mind. And we tend to think that we've got to find truth the way science does, analytically. With analysis, you'll never understand things unless you bring the heart into it too. Einstein also talked about the importance in scientific discovery and investigation of a sense of mystical awe. And in this, I have tried to bring that dimension into the teachings of my great guru that I try to share with you all. But I would like you to listen, not just with your mind. Listen to the words, because they tie in with the music. They go together. Listen to the music, because it gives a message. I learned this in my career of writing, that the music, the melody, is a very important statement in itself. And I think perhaps the greatest testimonial, in a sense, that I ever received was a couple of years ago. 55 people from our choir, from our different communities, came to Italy, where I live, on a tour. They sang in 6 cities. It was a wonderful experience. They had standing ovations everywhere. They sang my oratorio, of which the first number tonight will be an introduction. It's hardly an oratorio kind of music, but it's from that. And after the concert in Assisi, I was born in Europe and grew up speaking languages there, so I understood that this man came up to me and said to me in French, I don't know a word of English, I don't know a word of Italian, but I understood everything. No greater satisfaction can be felt by a composer than to feel that even if the words aren't known, that the message is there in the melody. I hope you'll listen in that way. I'm going to insert into the program one that isn't on your program, which is going to be the first one of the instrumentals, and it's from a suite from a larger suite called Life is the Quest for Joy. All the music that I've written is as a disciple of a master, as a disciple of truth, and in a wish, a profound desire to share truth with others on all levels. So let's welcome the choir.
High in the sky, who would hide from heaven's glory? Who would weather days of sunshine, gone with them in the rain.
The fires at evening said we were brothers. The fires at evening said we were brothers. A soldier I saw weeping beside a dying friend.
My officers had preached, I must hate him till the end.
But seeing his grief, I knew we were brothers. But seeing his grief, I knew we were brothers.
A man sat on a doorstep to see the children play. The gentle way he smiled there would charm your fears away. A stranger he, but love made us brothers. A stranger he, but love made us brothers.
One day I climbed a mountain with friends of other lands.
The words we used were different, but joy one understands.
Our gladness in God's world made us brothers. Our gladness in God's world made us brothers. The words and customs vary like waves upon the sea. One life beneath the surface finds everyone to me. Who knows himself knows all men as brothers. Who knows himself knows all men as brothers. Then brothers, why endeavor to set ourselves apart? The fences we've been building squeeze tight upon our hearts. Come sing the truth that all men are brothers. Come sing the truth that all men are brothers.
Sing of moon rays on the rain, sing that love's not in vain. Every grief, every wrong has its ending in song. Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Teach all men how to spin clouds of gloom into light. Without silence, what is song? Without night, where is dawn? Were it not for men's woes, who would smile at a rose? Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Let each tone silence crown, earth and heaven unite. Morning laughter, evening tears, snow and blossoms all fade. Joy must sing in the night to face change unafraid. Nightingale, nightingale, nightingale.
I lived with Paramhansa Yogananda for the last 3.5 years of his life. I'm living with him still. And what I bring is not the person nor the message so much as the spirit. Because he came with a spirit that it's been exemplified in so many ways. I'm going to tell you a little story that exemplifies it beautifully, but very simply. And that's what he was like. He was very simple. One time, a skeptic in India said to him, "Someday all you renunciates will be very disappointed when you wake up and discover that there is no God." Yogananda, with a big smile, said, "Well, you may be right, but at least we'll have the satisfaction of knowing that we've done some good." I thought it was so beautiful that with a simple answer like that, he could turn the heavy atheism of our day, the heavy skepticism, and all the attitudes that drag men down into a feeling of hopelessness, and suddenly give them a reason to enjoy, to hope. That's what his life did. He gave me and countless others reason to hope. Now, I was educated, as I think most of us here were, in the, you might almost say, the hopelessness of our day and age. It isn't hopeless, but so much of the hope is based on new discoveries. So much of the predictions of the future are about someday we'll be able to do this, someday we'll be able to do that, we'll be able to go to Mars and go across the galaxy and who knows what else. But it doesn't satisfy the heart. There's a book called Looking Backward by Edward Bellamy. It was written about 1890, and he projected a time 100 years in the future, and this hero of the story somehow fell into a trance and woke up in 100 years and found himself 100 years later with all the blessings of modern civilization. And I remember one particular passage. It must be a poignant one for many people, because I've read it quoted elsewhere too, where he turns on a knob in a box in his living room, and music comes into the room from some central place in the city, something unheard of in 1890. And his comment is that I cannot imagine a greater felicity than being able to bring beautiful music into my home. We all can do that. Are we felicitous? Are we really happy? I don't think so. Back in 1949, I read an article. This is looking backward. I didn't read it then, but it was in Popular Science Monthly, I believe, in which the editorial said that someday, predicting a marvelous but almost unbelievable future, computers will weigh as little as 1 ton. 1979, I think it was, the president of IBM predicted that it will never be possible to have computers in the home. Well, I can tell you I have mine in the home. It's just something we've learned to live with and can hardly live without. It is yet not giving us happiness. It isn't giving us fulfillment. We can do so many things and yet we don't find fulfillment. And you know, if you were to go to some other planet and you see programs on the radio, science fiction stories, you read science fiction stories, and you sort of imagine, and I suppose people have the idea now when they read about the possibility of other planets that maybe people had back in the days when America was discovered and people began traveling around the world, Vasco da Gama and others, and there was always probably in people's mind the dream that they would come upon some simple civilization, the noble savage as Rousseau depicted him, where people would live idyllic lives, happy, fulfilled, close to nature, no problems. Have we found such a life? No. Are we likely to if we go to another planet? Listen, the problem is that wherever There are beings, there are going to be egos. Wherever there's ego, there's going to be selfishness. Wherever there's selfishness, you've got the same mess of worms that you've got here. It won't be that different. You don't find perfection by going into the beauties of nature. Why? Because you're there. It's just as simple as that. I remember 1945. I'd had it with America. I decided I needed to get away among simple people. So I went to Mexico, and I thought, there I'm going to find simple people. Well, the problem was, I don't know how simple they were, but I could have the same stomach aches, the same headaches, the same moods in Mexico as I could in Scarsdale or Philadelphia or wherever else. The problem with it all was that I was there. And there was this girl, when I came back, I was at Brown University, and the movie had just come out, The Razor's Edge. I don't know how many of you saw it. It's an oldie now, but so am I an oldie. Never mind. And this girl at the coffee table in the college where we were said, oh, I would just love to go to India and get lost. Well, I'd just come from Mexico. I laughed. I said, whom would you lose? Certainly not yourself. That's the only thing you really want to lose. Well, this civilization has not given us what it's been promising us. It's been promising us felicity, heaven, paradise. You don't have it, do you? Why are you here tonight? Because there's something you're missing. You want something more. And the trouble with this world is that no matter what it is, there's always something more. There was a survey made of people in different income brackets, all the way from, well, in those days, $3,000, $5,000 a year was not so bad, up to $100,000, which was a lot in those days. And they asked everybody, are you happy with what you've got? Everybody said, virtually, this is an average response, but pretty much it encapsulates the response of all of them. We would be happy if we had 10% more. That 10% more represents something you'll never get. It's like a carrot on the end of a stick. And you keep straining after that carrot like a donkey, pulling a load of worries behind you, never reaching the carrot, but somehow that load of worries gets pulled, and so the donkey's owner feels satisfied. We don't find what we're looking for as long as we think we're going to find it outside. Well, as I said, we've all had a certain education, and I had it too. I was, in a way, even more exposed to the variety of Western culture than most of you have been, because I was born in Romania. And it's not that my parents were Romanian, they were American, but my dad worked in the oil field. He was an oil geologist, and I lived there for the first 13 years of my life, which is fairly formative, and I went to school there and in Switzerland and in England. I grew up speaking several languages, and I've come to see Western civilization from all the different points of view that, I don't say all, but a pretty good representative. But what I noticed in my education again and again was an underlying, well, you've seen it, cynicism. I thought that, well, it isn't really that meaningful. Education today is basically atheistic. It tells you there isn't a God because you've got to be scientific about it. And the first thing science does is to say we can't know whether there's a God or not, therefore we'd better eliminate him from our reckoning and think only of the things we can prove. Well, so far so good. But the next step beyond that is to say that because we've eliminated him, therefore there isn't a God. And an awful lot of scientific educated people feel that there is no higher value. There are no real moral standards in life. Everything is relative. They don't say relative to what. They basically mean relative to what I want. If I want it, fine, it's good. This is what we've been brought up with. And I tell you, I was different in this respect. I had grown up in Europe, yes. I had seen the Second World War brewing, yes. I'd seen all the tension and hatred. I went to school in Switzerland just about the time when the Nazis came into Austria, or just a little bit before, and I remember going through the streets of Vienna, and these Nazi officers seeing us would say, "Heil Hitler!" and I'd say, "Oh, hi there." Yeah, from a 9-year-old boy, I guess I could get away with it, I don't know. But I couldn't feel the hatred for the Germans that so many people were trained to feel here, because I knew the Germans too as a people, going across the country, finding that we needed help because we had a Wasserpump, a water pump that wasn't working, and how many people would come out to help us. And people are people everywhere. They aren't Germans, Americans, Japanese, everything else. No, they're just human beings. This is one of the lessons that I've learned in traveling around the world, and I've lived in so many countries. But I've seen that people are people. Sure, they may like curry, they may like pasta, they may like mashed potatoes and peas and apple pie, but they're basically just human beings. And a full belly full of curry is just the same as a full belly full with a Thanksgiving dinner. The enjoyment of this world, the need for love, the need for peace, all these things are universal. And even some people who manifest evil, and some people do. God has given us the opportunity to go upward or downward on the ladder of evolution. We can find fulfillment in ourselves, or we can find it in hurting people. This is the mistake that people can make before they finally learn that that little child who pulls the wings off a fly and thinks he's having fun, later on, as he becomes sensitive, he begins to feel, ouch, I'm hurting myself. You say something unkind to somebody and you feel, I really gave him a piece of my mind, didn't I? Then you begin to discover that, wait a minute, I'm in that person. There's a beautiful story in India about a saint who, a disciple came to him and he found him bleeding. And he said, "Who did this to you, Master?" And the saint said, "I'm afraid you did." "Never! I never would have hit you." He said, "Oh, yes, you did. You hit that man out there. And when you hit him, you hit me." And didn't Jesus Christ say that too? Didn't he say that who gives to even this least of my little ones gives unto me? Who hurts, hurts me. When you hurt others, you do hurt yourself. And gradually, as a person becomes more and more refined, he begins to understand that we are all one blood. We are all one human being underneath the appearances of life. You know, it's a wonderful illustration that Yogananda gave of a gas burner on a stove. And each of those little jets projects a different flame. But if you look underneath, you see that it's the same gas that's producing all those flames. And so each one of us is like a separate little gas jet. But there's a lot more sophistication in that. Even a gas jet can seem big or small depending on the size of the opening. It can seem colored according to little powders, chemicals you might put on it, filters you might put it over it. And so every jet flame can have a different color, a different size. Well, of course, we're a lot more sophisticated than that. And so some of us seem proud, and some of us seem humble, and some of us seem greedy, and some of us seem generous, and everybody has a different personality. And it's really amazing when you see a group of people like this, or go out in the streets and watch people passing you, what God can do with 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. It's incredible. How much variety, because each one of us looks at life in a different way. You know, this is something, one of the lessons that Yogananda gave, not just by example, but by spirit. And it's his spirit that I try to bring to people. I used to never, mind you, any one of you whom I know, I can close my eyes and visualize you clearly, if I know you at all well. Well, I knew him pretty well. I lived with him. I could never think what he looked like. I had to look at a photograph. And you know why? I gradually caught on to the secret of it. There was no sense of ego there. There was no sense of, I want this, I don't like this, I like that person, I don't like this type. None of that. It isn't that when you looked into his eyes there was a vacuum, but when you looked into his eyes you saw yourself. And it was an amazing experience that I saw in photographs with him. A photograph of him with Portes Gil, who was the president of Mexico at that time, and Yogananda visited there, and he was probably the most popular lecturer in America, and he was hosted by many people, including Calvin Coolidge, Portes Gil, many other great people. And one time in Washington, D.C., Amelita Galli-Curci, who was a famous soprano, about on the level of Caruso, extremely talented Italian. And one time she was giving a concert, and all of a sudden she looked up and she started waving her handkerchief, and everybody looked around, and there was Yogananda waving back at her. Everybody clapped. But he was so popular that everybody was drawn to him. Well, anyway, here he was with Portes Gil. And Portes Gil was sort of like the name would imply, rather portly, like this. Somehow Yogananda looked portly. Well, you could say, okay, maybe he was portly. But the odd thing was that I saw him in another photograph next to Amelita Galli-Curci, who was frail, small, older, and darned if he didn't look small, frail, older. He didn't change his body, he changed his attitude. He became whoever he was with. He was a flawless mirror who reflected back to you what you had. But what I found was that it was always a reflection from our higher self. He didn't, if you were angry, reflect anger back to you. He always reflected back to you what your own inner self would think of that anger. Sort of regret. That's not the best attitude, is it? Something in you, but it would be you, not his reaction to it, your reaction. Whatever, when he gave counseling to so many different people. But to each person it was unique, it was individual. I think it's a colossal mistake to say, I know what he was like, I was with him. Nobody can know what he was like. Nobody can say he was with him. He was everybody in the world. He was sort of the soul of life itself. And when he gave counseling to people, it was different for everyone. There were certain teachings that he gave to everybody. Of course, no teacher has ever come on earth and said, my children, for a change, let's hate everybody. There are certain teachings that are natural, that are fulfilling for everybody. But when he narrowed it down to each individual, it was a completely unique teaching, unique guidance. I was always astounded at how particular his guidance was to me. It wasn't the same to other people. And I remember giving some what I thought was good advice, because I was in charge of the monks then, and there was this monk who lived in another colony, and I felt that he needed something. Yogananda said, when he came, he was out at the time, he said, it's my job to train these people, not yours. I'd given him good advice, but it wasn't the advice he would have given. Because it's something that's got to be particular. Any of you who have anything to do with helping other people, don't ever say, this is what I've found. It may not be what they will find. I've found again and again, in trying my humble best to be of some use to people in counseling them and so on, that sometimes they'll come up with a problem that absolutely is just beyond my experience. I don't know anything about what to say. And sometimes I don't at all mind saying I don't know, but I try. And after a bit, I just have to say, well, I'm sorry, I really don't know. I've been amazed how often I do know, right in that instant. Because when we can relax ourselves and our thoughts and what I've learned and what I've known from experience and so on, tune into them, suddenly we see, oh yeah, that's what they want. And how often after that kind of counseling, people say, yeah, that's what I was looking for. Well, you could say then, in that case, why didn't they find it? It's not so easy. The mind is complex. But this is what Yogananda brought. And it was so inspiring to be with him, to see how he was really universal. There was one story, I've mentioned it in a book of mine called The Path, in which he was in the car, they were passing close to closing time for most shops, and suddenly he said, stop the car. He got out, walked back a few doors. There was a little sort of a trinket shop there, and he walked inside and bought a number of totally useless things. And this friend of mine who was with him at the time thought, what's he ever going to do with that? And he brought these trinkets up to the counter. It was just about closing time. And the lady added them up at the cash register. And she burst into tears. She said, I badly needed just this amount of money. I needed it today and the shop had to close soon. God sent you. He didn't need those things. He never used them. But he knew. Now, how could he know? Here's a woman in a shop. Didn't even know what the shop was, but he felt her thoughts. I saw this in him. I felt it. Oh, how many times. Sometimes it could be a little embarrassing, because he knew every thought that I had. One time, I was giving a talk to somebody, and he was an atheist, and well, he was from Beverly Hills, that should say something. He was a Jewish psychiatrist, that should say something else. He was an atheist, take it for granted. And he was sort of scoffing at the whole idea of yoga and the whole idea of spirituality. And I was trying to sort of convince him, well, you know, when you try to convince people, let them convince themselves or don't try. It's got to come from them. You can't lade them with all these stories that you can talk about. They won't mean anything to them. Well, I was young, I was new on the path, inexperienced. I tried to tell him certain things that I had seen, miracles, whatever. And I could see that in his mind he was sort of thinking, let's see now, Monday at 11, I think I have an appointment open. I can take him then. 2 or 3 days later, because Yogananda often had me serving his guests lunch, and then I'd do postures for him, and then after they left, then he and I would sit there and he'd talk for a little while with me and give me some advice or encouragement or whatever, I don't know. But we were there alone after this little luncheon, and he paused for a moment. He said, oh, by the way, when you're with skeptics, don't talk about miracles. I knew what he meant immediately. I said, you know. He said, I know every thought you think. Wow. Now, isn't that incredible? Now, I can see him having some sort of psychic session with me, maybe thinking, now he's thinking so and so. You know, Duke University experiment. You have a screen here. Somebody on one side of the screen is visualizing a ship, let's say, with a mast. And somebody on the other side says, I see a tree. Okay, that'll do. Successful experiment. Well, it wasn't like that at all. I'm just one of hundreds and hundreds of disciples. That he could say, I know every thought you think, is just an incredible statement. You hear that from Jesus Christ, where he knew that somebody was well, somebody was cured, even though they couldn't know outwardly. He knew things that were happening. He knew things that would happen. You hear it in the stories of lives of great saints. I lived with that kind of man. He was not a man. He was a master. He used to say, I killed Yogananda long ago. No one dwells in this temple now but God. And when I looked into his eyes, I saw there was not a person there. There was this infinite love. A love that was so incredible that sometimes, you know, I used to be short-sighted. I did have laser surgery. Now I can see every one of you. Watch out. I couldn't see well at all. I couldn't see across a room. And I remember just about to leave a room, he was sitting across the room from me. It wasn't any expression in his eyes. I couldn't see any expression in his eyes. I could see he was there. But all of a sudden I felt this love just overwhelming me. Tears poured down my cheeks. This kind of magnetism your average person doesn't have. He had it. I remember sitting with him. And he'd be talking about things you have to talk. I mean, you can't be sitting there constantly just declaring universal truths or saying, "Lo, I am with you always." There's got to be time for the potatoes and stuff. And he'd talk about things like maybe a driveway that needed fixing, potholes filled and so on. But I wasn't involved in that particular work, so I could just sit there and listen. And my God, that joy that overwhelmed me. It was something I haven't felt except in the presence of a few people like him. Because I have had the good fortune to mix, to meet, to be with people who I feel knew God. There was a woman saint in India called Ananda, and I just was overwhelmed with love, not for her, for what came through her. I remember one time I was in Haridwar and I had to take a train, and the train was just about to leave, and I should run, but she said, "All right, go." And I said, finally I just had to say, "Mother, I can't. As long as you're here, I just can't pull myself away." So she smiled and left, and then I could run, and I just... The train was pulling out as I dashed and jumped onto it. But that kind of love it's not something that you say, "Oh, I know God." I remember I met somebody in Big Sur one time, big bull of a man, and I was talking about spiritual things, and I said, I think I've maybe known 6 people in my life who knew God. Actually, I think it's more than that, but at the time I said 6. So he put out this bear-like hand. He said, "Shake, you just met the 7th." It isn't that easy. But you know, for example, Yogananda was on a train one time, crossing the country, as people had to do in those days, by train or car, but not planes. And there was this Negro black waiter who served him in the restaurant car there. And one day Yogananda couldn't sit at his table, and this man came with tears in his eyes, believe me, a complete stranger. And he said to him, "What have you got that I want?" Yogananda said, "Come to my cabin, come to my apartment," or whatever they call them. I forget now, it's been a while. And he taught him how to meditate. But this kind of thing is what the world needs. And because we get truth, but we don't get heart, we don't get love, we don't get music, but not just sounds, music of the soul. So we think that all we need to do is feed our brains. And how little are we encouraged in life to live with our hearts more. You think, oh, I hope you don't, but many people do. They look at a sunset, they think, yeah, that's pretty nice. Let's see, there's a good blend of red and... They analyze it all, and they think they've understood it because they can analyze it. You don't understand a damn thing as long as you're only analyzing it. You're a human being, and that means you have a heart, not just a head. It's when you can bring those two together that you can say, I do somewhat understand it, to the extent that I have understood myself. But I have been so thrilled to see that many people who come to Ananda, I've asked them, what brought you? Many have said, it's the music. Music. Shakespeare said, who has no music in his soul is fit only for stratagems, spoils, and I forget. You all know the saying. But stratagems, spoils. We need We need music. Not this kind of music that you hear from cars as you go, what? That's music, for God's sake? Music that uplifts, music that touches your heart, music that lifts your heart without song, without love, without joy. What is philosophy? I know I went to Brown University, as I told you, I went to philosophy class. After 2 or 3 classes, I used to bring a book of poetry and just read the poetry. I just couldn't stand all that stuff. What are definitions? And yet, in our culture today, we find that although Yogananda gave a very positive, hopeful view of it all, the way we're given it doesn't look all that hopeful. Go back to Copernicus. He first discovered, and this is what I've written. I've written a book called Hope for a Better World. It's my most recent book. And it's talking about all the different writers who have molded our present day thinking and showing where they mistook because they didn't have hope, mistook because they didn't have music, mistook because they thought only in terms of analysis, only in terms of not practice. You know, Plato, now nobody's going to argue with Plato, but I'll take the lead here. Plato wrote a book, well, it was his, his discussion of communities, an absolutely grotesque system. Read it, you'll find out for yourself. I'm not going to go into an analysis of it. What I want to say is that although it is grotesque, he suggests things for people that are just unreal. But the king of Syracuse at that time invited him to Syracuse to put his system of communities into practice. He did. It was a complete fiasco. And yet still today, 2,000 years later, students in university classes discussing Plato will learnedly talk about the pros and the cons and what do you think, Mr. Brown? Well, I think this, and what do you think, Mr. Green? And so on. But they don't ask the simple question, and that's what I found lacking in so many of these writers. They didn't ask first the simple question, does it work? Well, it didn't work. And what we need to do is be practical. You know, that's one of the wonderful things about America. I think it comes to a second nature almost, except when we're in college, to ask, does it work? Does it work? Well, but does it work? Not just as a machine, that's not enough. I mean, back in '39, they had the first, I think it was the first World's Trade Fair, and they had this beautiful design of a car and how wonderful life would be when everybody was driving this car. Well, I've lived long enough to see people driving an awful lot of cars. I remember one car I passed in San Francisco. Ira Blue was a commentator on the radio who reveled in getting people mad. And this car had a bumper sticker on the back, I hate Ira Blue. And I passed the car and looked at this woman. Just absolutely taken with her hatred of Ira Blue, I guess. But you know, does it work? Means, does it make us happier? When I was a 13-year-old, first of all, I got the idea for starting communities when I was 15. And I got my friends interested. All of them were gung-ho, because I'm an enthusiastic type. Until they found I was serious, then I was left alone. But I did believe that there's got to be a way of living that gives us what we want. To me, I wanted truth, yes. But truth, to me, meant something that's going to give me what I really want. Now, it does not matter to me greatly. I wanted to be an astronomer at first. At 13, I was grinding a telescope to make a mirror for a telescope. And maybe I'd have become an astronomer, I don't know. But unfortunately, toward the end of my grinding of this mirror, it slipped off the table and chipped. And I guess it took the heart out of that one. But, you know, does it really matter to you and me whether the universe has 1 billion, 100 billion galaxies, 200 billion galaxies? If someone were to come along and say, no, we've discovered there are 1 trillion galaxies, I think we'd probably turn away with a yawn. We've heard it all. What do all these facts mean if they don't touch us? More and more, I began to think, I want truth. But what is truth if it's only a mental concept? I want a truth that's going to touch my heart. I want a truth that will inspire. I want something that'll change my life, that'll give my life meaning. And meaning is not a formula. Meaning is that if I can go out and feel a little more joy, if I can feel a little bit more love, in that I'll have understanding. And if my understanding is born only of analysis, it's not understanding. It's another formula. And so I had this growingly intense desire for that which will inspire. I didn't want God at the time. I'd been brought up with spiritual teachings, but I thought, what's God? Just an old man on a throne? This is not for me. I couldn't believe in the way God was presented to me. I couldn't believe in the way he was talked about. I thought if he's like that, I don't want anything to do with the man. Man? Why does he have to be a man even? Can't he be an it? No, because it means something unconscious. Can't it be a he, a she, a huge, vast consciousness? I couldn't think of those terms. It didn't make sense the way it was presented. And so I tried science, politics, art, music, philosophy, this thing and that thing, communities, until everybody left me in the idea, and so on. And I discovered that what I really wanted was something that changed me, that made my life worth living. I remember one time going out with a friend and going up to a high mountain and looking out over the plains. And the sun was setting at that moment. And in the east, in the west, where the sun was setting, there was a sort of a mist, and the golden light of the setting sun on this mist. Then in the east, the moon was rising. It was a full moon. And in the east, the valleys were all this wonderful blue mist. It was one of those magic moments that we all live. And this friend of mine, after a few minutes, said, if only I could feel it. And that's the problem. How do we feel these things? They're almost a mental thought, an affirmation, but can we really enter? How many times in our lives can we say, I absolutely lived that moment? Sure, we've probably all had moments like that, but they're so few and far between. My search for truth was to think, how can I make those moments always? How can I really love life? How can I love people? How can I feel inspired no matter what I'm doing? If life can't give me that, in what way am I really different from turtles? I want something that makes me more than just an ordinary human machine. And I used to think in terms of God all the time, but I couldn't put my thought of God together with what I was learning. And I thought maybe we need a new political system, maybe we need new science, maybe we need new societies, maybe we need art. I wanted to be a poet and a playwright, and I thought after a while, my God, the greatest playwright in the English language is Shakespeare. How many people's lives have actually been changed by Shakespeare? It was a discouraging thought. I don't think anybody's life has absolutely been changed by Shakespeare. Affected, sure. I myself was deeply affected by him. It changed? I don't think so. No, there's something more that we needed. And I remember going out at night one night, walking into the dusk, and thinking, there's got to be a God. But what is he? He can't be a policeman up there waiting for me to make a mistake so he can clap me in hell for eternity. That doesn't make sense. But what is he? Well, who am I that I'm asking this question? The very fact that I can ask the question means that I'm conscious. And if I'm conscious enough to ask a question, there's got to be an answer. There has to be a consciousness. He has to be consciousness, otherwise I couldn't have invented consciousness. Consciousness had to be consciousness had to be a fact in the universe, a potential from the very beginning of time, or I wouldn't be conscious. Nothing that exists now can have come into existence if it wasn't at least a potential from the beginning of time. So God has to be there, and he has to be consciousness. But this consciousness has to be something greater than I am. And there are times when I feel more in tune with that. I remember sitting on a beach one night and thinking that here's the ocean. And the same ocean that it was a beach party at college. And I had sort of gone off from the others, and they were all singing college songs and toasting wieners and marshmallows and so on. I just felt to go off by myself. And I thought, this same ocean, this same sky that is here, is uniting us to people over there on the other side of the ocean. And that all of us are a part of this one great reality. And when I had that thought, I felt in some little way more in touch with that reality than I did when I was sitting with them all singing these songs. I've been working on the railroad, and you forget about the rest. But out there in the silence, I suddenly felt there's more. And when I was out there walking in that night, I began to feel that the more I'm in tune with that consciousness, the more I have of God. And the more I think about my little ego and my little needs and my preoccupations, the less I have of God. And therefore, the goal of life has to be to try to become more in tune with that. That was enough for me. I decided I'd give my life to that. I was going to be a hermit and just spend my life meditating, hoping to find maybe a little peace of mind. And that's when I came upon Yogananda's book, Autobiography of a Yogi. I couldn't believe my eyes. To be in touch with the Spirit. I mean, I was willing to give up everything just to have peace of mind. And here I found somebody who was so full of joy, wisdom, compassion, love. I thought, that's for me. And although I was a typical arrogant American male, the first words I said to him, I took the next bus from New York to Los Angeles. The first words I said were, I want to be your disciple. I had never imagined I'd ever say such words to anybody. But I have never changed my mind. My life is made worthwhile to the extent that I can bring that spirit that I gained from him to others. And I can bring it only to the extent that I find myself in tune with that. That's what Jesus said. Or rather, it said about him in the Bible, to as many as received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God. Now this is something that, try it. It's so easy. It's not something you've got to swallow, accept, believe, and when you die you'll find out if it was true or not. It's something you can find out right here. That's the beauty of it. You know, one of the wonderful things about life is that you can see all the things that people have tried. You can see people have looked for money, power, human love, fame, children, this thing, that thing, and the other. Look for it through science, look for it through exploration, look for it through all the different things people try. And you find that if you talk to them, not to the people who are in the beginning, you see young teenagers, college students. I remember this friend of mine, it happened to be the day that I found Autobiography of a Yogi in a New York bookstore. And this friend of mine from Scarsdale, where I grew up when I lived in this country, we happened to meet in that same bookstore on Fifth Avenue. And he was talking with me, great enthusiasm about this glowing future that he had visualized for himself in television and advertising and money and all these things. And the more he talked, the more I clutched that book to my heart. I said, that world isn't for me. I want something real, something lasting. Now this is what I've found. I haven't seen that boy since then, but I've seen an awful lot of others like him. At the age of 40, 50, 60, 70. Are they happy? Can they really say, I found what I was looking for? I doubt it. I only find one group of human beings that have been able to say, yes, what I was looking for, I found. And it's what everybody wants. You'll see that this is true in every religion, in every culture, in every century. Those who have sought God, you'll never find one who, having dedicated himself to that, says, yeah, I found him, what a scam. You see it in their eyes, there's joy. You see it in their eyes, they've got something you want. And they may not show it outwardly, but when you look into their eyes, mix with them a while, you say, oh, that's what I've been looking for. It's the pearl of great price. It's what Jesus offered. It's what Buddha offered. It's what Krishna offered. It's what St. Francis offered. It's the love of ages. It's the mystery of life. Love. Joy. This is you. Now, come from that. Okay, I'll tell you something. I was in India and I picked up a magazine called Span. It was the American USIS Information Service magazine in India. And it talked about the finding of modern philosophers, how there's no meaning in life, that life has no purpose, there's no goal in it all, it's absolutely relative, no purpose, no... I thought, I've come from a city of light. I know the answers to these stupid questions, I've got them. And then, recently, I wrote a book then, spent many years researching it. It wasn't easy either. Going into the camp of the enemy, you might say. Usually a person who's got a religious bias, as I certainly do. Not religious, spiritual. But having that bias, having to read people like Jean-Paul Sartre, who assures me there's no meaning in anything, it takes a certain amount of willpower to hang in there. Most people just say, oh, nonsense. But I wanted to help those people. That meant I had to go into their camp, see the way they reason. Honestly, look at Sartre. He says that life is, come on, you tell me.
Radically free. Man is radically free.
That's it. I knew he'd answer. I just had to look for him. Mankind is radically free. This is his premise. Now, mind you, if you reach that conclusion, fine, but to use it as a premise, then to spend a whole book, books in fact, saying finally we have demonstrated that mankind is radically free. Well, so he's free, therefore he's free. That's not logic, for God's sake. This is philosophical fraud. And so I found again and again, going into their camp, they missed basic facts. Darwin, very good analysis. I mean, you applaud the guy. Yes, I think this is very possibly a good explanation for how we evolved. You then ask the question, well, why? You know, one of the basic principles of modern science is the second law of thermodynamics. Everything is gradually losing temperature. And applied to everything else in life, which science tries to do, everything is slowly losing speed. How does that explain evolution? Am I really a step down from the mollusk? I don't think so. And maybe a monkey, like what I saw in a cartoon one time, this monkey whispering to another monkey, they pretend to be descended from us. What a presumption. But honestly, if you want to be honest, then why stop at monkeys? Why not go all the way back to the worms? That's who we really are, aren't we? No, you're not just worms, you're atoms. It's ridiculous to say where you're coming from if you can ask the perfectly obvious question, where are you going? You know, when I set out from home to go shopping, people don't ask so much where I've come from. They ask, what do you want? What are you looking for? What are you trying to get? Darwin didn't ask the right question. He asked how, and he may be right, he may not be right. It's not pertinent enough. How many of you, when you leave your home in the morning, assume you live near a few bushes, shy away from every bush, thinking, oh, there might be a rattlesnake there, worried about self-preservation? I doubt it. You don't worry about cars bowling you over. Yeah, you try to be careful. You know that cars can bowl you over, so avoid the damn things. But meanwhile, you're trying to enjoy life. Darwin didn't talk about consciousness. Darwin didn't talk about the things that are meaningful to us. Frankly, I think it's fine, but it's not enough. Too much of modern science is pure mechanism. Adam Smith wrote the book, The Wealth of Nations. Very good book. Actually, a lot of people are very down on him because he stated the obvious. Well, it is obvious that people are out for themselves. Who wouldn't be? He said perfectly clearly and obviously that let's see what time it is. I could go talking all night, and I don't want to do that to you. Okay. Perfectly obvious, he said, that a baker is not there to help you, he's there to help himself. There's nothing new about that. Everybody was outraged. They said, what about Christian ethics? Well, for heaven's sake, I don't think that Jesus Christ would have helped people if he'd known that in helping them he would go to hell. Everybody's got to start with something. This is what the problem with the beginning of modern science, you could say, was Copernicus, who discovered the world is not the center of the universe, as everybody thought. In fact, they didn't even know there was a universe out there. Some people probably thought it was just little lamps dangling or little holes in space, lots of theories. But people didn't really have an idea that man was so small as he is, and the discovery since his day, Galileo with his telescope being able to see, justify, Tycho Brahe, Kepler, all of those people gradually discovering how vast this universe is. You know, it was only about 1890 that they found that the sun is not the center of the universe. It's just one little star among many, a very average kind of size. We're not at the center, we're on the outskirts of a galaxy. When I was a boy, mind you, I haven't lived that long, I'm not Methuselah, it was 1936 or so, when a teacher in my school in England came to me just all thrilled with the information that, do you know that there are other star systems besides our own? That in 1918, Hubble, I think it was then, that he discovered that the nebula in Andromeda is really a galaxy. And when he talked to me, he said, you know, there are even scientists postulate as many as 2 or 3 other galaxies. Now they say there are 100 billion, but who's counting? How vast it all is. And so the scientific attitude toward this is that it reduces us to absolutely nothing. What are we? And yet, if you take the other view, and this is what Yogananda gave to us, hope. He said, okay, what are we? I'm the only person that can ever know anything about anything else. I have to begin with me. That's why the Greek saying, gnoti salton, know thyself, is the key to all wisdom. You can never know anything except with reference to what you perceive. So you've got to begin with you. This means that you, and individually you, are the most important thing in the universe. Science today no longer thinks in terms of vastness. It tries to epitomize. It says the atom is the key to the universe. And much more than the atom, you are the key to the universe. You will never understand anything except in relation to your own ability to understand, your own ability to perceive, your own ability to enjoy. You know, scientists think that life is just statistics. I cannot believe that this nature, which has produced so much beauty, isn't aware in some way of that beauty. I don't think that a peacock who spreads his tail is not aware that it's spreading something beautiful. I can't believe that a butterfly with its beauty isn't aware in some way of its beauty. I think nature is very self-conscious. You know, there's a book, many of you possibly have read it. You can find it at our East West bookstore in Seattle here, I imagine. Hope I'm not speaking out of line. But it's a very interesting book about this woman who has some sort of telepathic ability with animals. She says animals don't speak to you the way we communicate with words, but they project images, they project ideas, and animals are intelligent. I know when I was living in Bucharest as a boy, I was 10 years old at the time, and we had a little Scottish Terrier. We called him Jasper. And my brother, who was 8 years old, or 9 at the time, just a boy, he came out with Jasper one time, and the dog catchers there, who got some money for every dog they could catch, figured, well, here's a little boy, we can take this dog. And so they were all going with their nets to grab Jasper. And my brother was a plucky little chap. He grabbed their net and said, "Run, Jasper, run!" Jasper was the laziest thing you ever saw. But this time he ran. And those men were pounding after him, and Jasper, being lazy, found a convenient bush and hid behind it. And those men went pounding after him, and Jasper trotted home. And we were so proud of him for his intelligence. For weeks afterwards, we would speak about this experience of Jasper's. Now he had outwitted the dog catchers by hiding behind a bush. Every time he did so, we just had to begin the story. He'd be wherever he was, under a table or something, lying as usual. He knew what we were talking about. Well, here this woman, some couple came to them and they said they had a dog who suddenly had stopped eating and they were worried. So she tried to tune into this dog, and she got the image that there were 2 new dogs in the family and that the owners had bought little shiny tin plates for these dogs, but they left the older dog with his porcelain plate. And he was jealous. He didn't like not having a beautiful shiny plate. So he just refused to eat. And when they bought him a shiny tin plate, then he could eat happily again. Look, that shows aesthetic sense, doesn't it? You see it in animals. You see that when a dog is well groomed, it's proud of itself. It's just a part of nature. Why do we have to say we're projecting ourselves? For God's sake, what else have you got to project? If you're just going to sit there and think, you're projecting anyway. But what a dull universe you're projecting. A universe in which nobody cares for nobody, nothing enjoys nothing. It's ridiculous. Why not just think that if you could enjoy, the universe surely enjoys too. The birds must enjoy their songs, otherwise why would they sing? And so beautifully. And you'll find that there's competition. When one bird sings beautifully, another one will try to sing more beautifully. It's just a part of nature. We're just a little part of some very big drama. And we're all partaking in it. And somebody who says it's just me and me. I remember a Zen Buddhist talked to me. I don't know if this is Zen philosophy. I'm just talking about him. But he said, when I die, everything will disappear. Well, my first thought might have been, well, for God's sake, don't die. Sort of follow him wherever he went and make sure he's... But my tendency was more to think philosophically. And I thought, well, that doesn't make sense. If he created everything, could he himself have written Shakespeare's plays? Could he have written Mozart's symphonies? Could he have done all these things that people have done? Could he have done the things that God has done? I love the story of Mozart one time, how he died young, but he was in his 30s when a younger composer said to him, well, how do you compose symphonies? And Mozart said, well, you have to begin with simple things, with string quartets, duets, and so on. And the young man said, but you didn't do all that. Mozart said, yes, but I didn't have to ask. And you have that knowledge, you know it. You don't have to get it from outside. Yet it's not a projection. We're a part of a great symphony of life. And how much more wonderful it is to think that way. But the beautiful thing is, yes, I lived with somebody who thought that way, lived that way. To him, life was a symphony. And I found that he could relate much more to all levels of reality. He could understand what was in people's hearts. He could understand what they wanted. He could help them to fulfill, like that woman in that shop, just passing her. But he felt her thoughts. and wanted to help her. He didn't say anything. He had no pride about it. He didn't say, yes, I know, I bought that woman these things because she needed it. He didn't say anything. As far as my friend knows, he never used the stuff he bought, but maybe he did. And he was so much like a child. There was none of this arrogance that you find in professorial types. I remember one time, because I was too intellectual myself, I came to him that way. He broke me of that habit. But I remember one time we were out at his retreat in 29 Palms, and he had somebody bring a package, and he turned the light out. Then suddenly out of the dark, bzz, 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 you know these guns that emit sparks? Here's this great sage, had a little gun that... So he turned the light on, then he shot another pistol, and this thing went up, became a parachute, and came down. And he looked right at me. He said, "What do you think of that? How do you like that?" I said, "It's fine, sir." I had to put it all together here, this great sage. But then he looked at me, he said, "Suffer little children to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of God." And you'll find that great people are childlike. They're not pompous and self-important. Because truth is always, we're nothing compared to God. We're just little children enjoying. Just like I think it was a story of St. Augustine, who one time he had developed a certain pride in his great learning. And he was out walking and he saw this little child, 3 years old or something, taking a bucket and emptying it onto the beach. He stopped and watched him. When the child went and took another bucket full, emptied it onto the beach. After 4 or 5 of these, he said, "What are you trying to do? Are you trying to empty that ocean, that sea, with your little bucket?" The child looked at him with wisdom. He said, "Is it any stranger for you to try to empty the sea of all knowledge and wisdom with your little brain?" He disappeared. Don't you see how small we are? But what hope there is if we can understand that we have some connection with everything. Think of Adam Smith again. Here we have this baker who was only thinking of himself. Well, what Adam Smith failed to do, but what I did with Yogananda's teachings, with our American education, I'd go so far as to say, does it work? I just asked the simple question, let's be more specific. Let's just think of 2 bakers in town. One baker lives like this, and we'll call him William Baker, okay? Might as well. But there's another baker in town, we'll call him Joe Crumpet. I use this example in my book. Now, William Baker is only thinking of himself. And when people come to his shop, he's only thinking what I can get out of this guy. But Joe Crumpet has a completely different thing. He's certainly there for the money. He has to be. That's his job. He has to support his family. But he also welcomes his customers as friends. He asks them what they'd like. He asks them after their family. He says, "How is your little boy? Has he overcome his flu?" And so on. Now, each one of them is really out. He's got to have a job. That's his way of supporting himself. But one of them includes others in his selfishness, if you want to put it that way. The other excludes them. Now, whom will you go to? Assuming you're in that town and you've got Joe and Bill to choose between. I think it's pretty obvious you'll go to Joe Crumpet unless you've got such a compassionate heart that you want to help poor old William, because nobody goes to the poor guy. But obviously, there are 2 kinds of ego, aren't there? One which includes others, another which excludes others. One which embraces, another which pushes away and thinks only me. And you see, there's nothing wrong with ego. You've got to begin somewhere, and you're where you have to begin. You don't have any choice. But do you have the kind of ego that William Baker has that says me, 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 and tries to take? Or do you have the kind of ego that says with Joe Crumpet, let me find happiness through others, that expands? Jesus had that. He said it is more blessed to give than to receive. Why? Because in giving you expand your consciousness, you expand your identity, you expand your sympathies, you expand your own self-fulfillment. That's what's been wrong with our society. I look at the stories of big companies suddenly being discovered in default and having debts that they've not admitted up to billions of dollars, and I think it's perfectly simple. They think they're going to get what they want by being greedy. America has gone too far. The world has gone too far toward greed. It's going to have to learn a lesson. It's going to be a hard one, but it's necessary. We've got to think of ourselves, but we need to include others in that self. We need to feel that in all, God is present. What a wonderful life it is if when you walk through the street and you see people unhappy, and you see it all the time, but you see them in that unhappiness, you don't just think, oh, I wonder why he's unhappy. Do you suppose his wife didn't treat him well? Did his child go to the hospital? Did he lose his job? Whatever it might be. Those are the psychological reasons. They're valid enough. But there's something more. In every human being, there's this hunger for something we all wanted. We all want love. We all want joy. We all want to be inspired. And you see that this same longing, people don't know that God is there. God is what they want. The only people who have found what they want in life are people who have found God. God isn't somebody up there on a cloud or in outer space. He's in you. He's your own self. He's like, to go back to that simple illustration of the burners on a stove. If that gas were conscious, instead of going outward toward the flames and seeing, that's you, the flames meaning all the things you get excited about, all the ambitions, all the things you want to do, your energy going outward to the world. What about that gas looking backward? If that gas jet were conscious and looked back to its source, it would realize that it isn't all those, just one of those little many jets. It's that one uniting gas. And so that one uniting consciousness, he's in all of us. He's our own self. And the more you have of him, the more you feel that he's in all. And this is when Jesus looked at people, he may have wept for their sins, but boy, I'll tell you, nobody would have followed him if he'd just stood there weeping for their bloody sins. They felt his compassion. They felt his love when he stood on the Mount of Olives and looked down at Jerusalem and said, Jerusalem, how many times I would have gathered you like a mother hen gathering her chicks, and you would have nothing to do with me. The suffering of Jesus on the cross wasn't his pain, physical pain he transcended ages ago. That wasn't what hurt him. It was that pouring out that love, God pouring out that love to people, and people turning their hearts, turning their backs callously on God. What a pain to one who knows that love and knows that that love is in every heart. The most evil person inwardly has love, has a longing for love, has a longing for joy. They may not have it, but they long for it. It's universal because God is in everybody. I remember when Yogananda was old and we were helping him into the car because he had a little difficulty with his knees. And he said, you all are so kind to me with your many attention. We said, oh, sir, it's you who are kind to us with your spiritual wealth. And he just smiled sweetly. He said, God is helping God. That's his drama. If we can only see this world as that, we see hope everywhere. And that's what Yogananda gave us. But he also said, because he was practical, he said it will only work if you put it to practice. See if it works. Big experiments that kill, the Russians and the communists in China together have killed, it's been estimated, 100 million of their own people. Anybody who disagrees with you, kill him. That way you prove your theory was right. Does it? I don't think so. Why not work with a few people who agree with you? People who would like to try. When Orville and Wilbur Wright put their plane into the air at Kitty Hawk, all sorts of experts absolutely pontificated it's not possible. And yet they did it. Nobody could argue with facts. Within a generation, people were flying everywhere. All you need is something that works. Lots of communities have been tried and not succeeded, but you know, America started on that principle. Communities are just about the most American thing you can do. People came from England to find spiritual freedom. That's basically the difference between North and South America. They went there to find gold. They came here to find religious freedom. That's the basis of this country. Communities are the basis of it. And I think the most sensible thing, and it's something Yogananda talked about constantly, the most sensible thing that people can do is say, okay, let me see if I can't live with people with whom I have some compatibility, with whom I can share not just my laughter but my tears, with whom I can share my ideals and not be afraid to talk about things that are meaningful to me. Because if a few people live that way and find that it's doing a good thing, others begin to find it. You know, I can talk now. It's been about 35 years since I first got the land for Ananda. I got the idea when I was 15, but it took me many years to be able to bring into outward fruition what Yogananda talked about with so much zeal. And Ananda now has been there, and we have communities at Nevada City, Sacramento, Palo Alto, Portland, Seattle, a new one starting in Rhode Island, in Assisi, Italy, where I live. All of these things are bringing many thousands of people from all over the world. Because when you see a few people living something and it works, somebody said to me once, you have wonderful people here. I said, listen, one or two people you can meet and you can say they're wonderful. But when you see many people who are wonderful, you have to say it's what they're doing. Everybody in the world can be like that if they can just learn to live that way. And being among others is one of the first things that gives hope. And so I say there is hope for a better world because of the truth that I hope to, in my little way, to bring about, to spread the consciousness, the spirit, yes, but also the solid place. We have some 800 people living in these communities. You don't see fights, you don't see jealousy, you don't see meanness. When somebody makes a mistake, people are there to try to help him, not to just gossip about him. When somebody needs help, they are there to work for them, not to beat them down. Isn't that a wonderful thing to have in this world? When people see this kind of example, people everywhere can decide, why not live like that? I say that communities are the hope for the future of the world, because I say that a few people living it can set an example that will make other people say, well, why not? And when other people do it, and more people, I don't think you need a huge communistic imposition on the whole universe. Just a few people doing what they do. It doesn't have to be Ananda. You know, in my book, I don't even mention Ananda by name. Why not? Because I don't want, well, for God's sakes, if everybody became a member of Ananda, think of the bureaucracy. But that's not what I want. Really what I want is an ideal which you can put into practice in so many ways, in religion, in other ways, if people can learn to live the simple, small-town life, but with a reason. Not just gather together because there happens to be a coal mine or a port, but because you share the same ideals, and because you want to help others to share those ideals. It's a new way of life. I think after 35 years we can say we're here to tell you it works. And I'm hoping that some of you will take this seriously, because certainly in a time of depression, which I think is coming, people are going to feel awfully lost if they aren't able to work hand in hand with good friends, with people who share and can stand together. And so I'd like to ask our choir to come up and sing a song which I'd like all of you to join us in. Many hands make a miracle. I'll sing with them. Don't you all get up on the risers? You might as well. Nope. Wow, look at those colors. You need your
The rest
guitar?
of this song is in your program. Please join us the second time.